Good afternoon, or morning, or evening, or wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the second session of our two-part webinar series called "Making HR Digital in a Post-Pandemic World," hosted by Peopleforce in association with HRmeansbusiness. I'm Denis Barnard of HRmeansbusiness. Now, selecting and implementing technology such as HR, payroll, workforce management, learning, performance, and recruitment systems can be challenging, and getting it wrong can be very costly. Today's webinar will focus on implementation. The first part was focused more on selection of software. Now, throughout the webinar, everybody will be placed on mute. We want to make this session sort of interactive as much as we can. Therefore, I'd like to encourage you to post any questions you've got using the chat function there. And we'll cover them off during a discussion, a Q&A session towards the end. We'll also cover off a few questions that have been received by us already in advance. And during this webinar, there'll be a couple of poll questions which we'd like you to take part in, which usually gives a very interesting result. So, presenter for today's session is Pritul Khagram. Pritul is founder and CEO of Peopleforce. He's a chartered fellow of the CIPD and a people technology selection and implementation expert. He's been involved in supporting various clients with selecting and implementing people technology across various industry sectors and across the UK and globally. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce you all to Pritul.
Great. Thank you very much, Denis, and thank you everybody for joining us yet again. So let's begin this session. So I'll just start sharing my slides, and hopefully you can see my slides now. Okay. So today's session, as Denis mentioned, is a guide to best practice implementation, best practice people technology implementation. So this could consist of HR, payroll, workforce management, which is often called time and attendance, or there may be some rostering, scheduling systems, learning, performance, and recruitment systems. Now, replacing systems or introducing new systems can be a challenge. What can you expect during the implementation to make it a successful change program is what we're going to essentially be covering off today. Right, so the key things to remember is, as I've just alluded to, is that it is a change program. So you're going to face a lot of people that are feeling nervous, apprehensive about the change. Some people might be feeling like their jobs could be on the line, for example. Sometimes people think that technology takes over human activity. So there's all sorts of apprehension that is experienced during this kind of implementation, and that's why we term it as a change program. But I think there's some benefits here to appreciate and understand. It will help the organization transform the way they do things, the way in which they engage with their workforce. Now even more so than before, because the recent pandemic has shown that organizations have had to engage with their workforce using technology and other means. It's a great opportunity to review processes as well. Because it's a change, you might as well take into account what you used to do before, so your as-is processes, and documenting what your to-be processes should be. And using technology to implement those new changes, I think, is very important. Going with a big bang approach sometimes isn't the best approach. So phasing the implementation by module or location helps you understand and make this a success in terms of, you really need to understand what your priorities are, what your drivers are, and introduce those features and functionalities first and go with a phased approach. You need to have a dedicated project team. That's very, very important. I mean, a lot of clients often do not realize how how much work is involved, especially from the internal team. A lot of clients take the view that the chosen provider, will help implement the system. That is true. However, I think one of the risks is that organizations do not understand the extent of the workload involved during implementation on their side of the project. So I'm talking more about the internal project team. And so therefore it is very important to have a dedicated project team. Otherwise, essentially, it could be a recipe for disaster. Of course, the internal team are probably also busy with business as usual activities. And so therefore, it's very important that time is made available to those team members to devote to both the project and the business as usual activities. Another important thing here to remember is the data. So a lot of organizations have got data that has been built and has been updated and maintained by using different sources, different systems, different people. And so the integrity of the data or the quality of the data is perhaps something that ought to be rectified at this time during an implementation. It's the best time to do it. So not only should you be engaging in data migration activities by populating the chosen provider's data templates, but also taking the opportunity to cleanse that data. And I think that's very important as well during an implementation. Also important to remember that it is a business tool. You're not just getting an HR system. You're getting a tool that is contributing to transforming the way the business operates, in particular in the way it engages with workforce. I mean, you take the workforce of the future into account, and you take you see that there are a huge amount of millennials, for example, that are going to form a huge population of the future workforce. I saw a stat somewhere from Deloitte that up to 75% of the workforce by 2025 is likely to be millennials. This means that organizations need to shift the way they do things and engage with this group of people. You would know that millennials are pretty much always glued to their phone. So introducing mobile technology and making things available on the mobile phone, such as pay slips or shift swaps or information or policies, etc., is going to become vital. And so I'd really urge organizations to think about the future workforce when you're implementing technology and the way in which you can engage with them using technology. So let's take a look at the implementation team. So typically you would have an implementation team from the provider. So whoever you've selected, they will typically assign a project manager. They will have consultants that would carry out training and configuration activities. You may have some specialist consultants, such as payroll or reporting experts. You will have data consultants that are working with you as part of the data migration activities, in particular, the transfer of data and supporting you through that into potentially a test system initially, and then transfer over to a live production. Now, important piece here about the data consultants is that usually the provider's data consultants will not touch the data until you have provided that to them in a template, for example. So you are, as an internal team, required to do a lot of the grunt work there as part of the data migration exercise. Of course, then once the project is live, you'd be handed over to support desk, or that will be your point of contact for support-related activities. And you would also have an account manager, or more recently known as a customer success team. So that's the provider's team. What about the internal team? So the internal team would need to have a project sponsor, of course, a project manager. This can be someone from within the HR team, or it could be an external or interim that you engage to manage the project. Of course, you've got the HR team, these people will be subject matter experts because they will understand the processes, the way things happen in the organization. So it's very important to involve the HR team during an implementation. And again, what I said earlier, these people are going to be engaged in business as usual activities as well as project related activities. So it's important to ensure that their time is divided accordingly. They will also prove to be vital as part of the data migration and cleansing process because they know the data well and they're able to review that work and ensure that the cleansing exercise takes place well because, again, it's a great opportunity to do this. Payroll team, of course, if payroll is in scope, they need to be involved. They are the payroll subject matter experts internally. Of course, going forward, you will need to nominate someone to be the internal system administrator. And so this person should be the internal go-to person or expert that you would have as part of your HR payroll team. Now, typically this is within the HR team as opposed to the IT team, because a lot of systems nowadays are built with giving the client the ability, non-technical client members, the ability to make tweaks or reconfigure certain pieces of functionality within the system themselves. And training is often given during the implementation stages anyway. IT will need to be involved to depending on the type of deployment you've had. They may be involved with things like third-party interfaces. They will have a say on things like single sign-on, Active Directory, Outlook integration, etc. But I don't really see IT being involved in a kind of a business-as-usual capacity going forward. If your internal team is completely swamped with business as usual activities, you've got to ask yourself whether you have the capacity to make this project a success. Typically, you are spending a huge amount of money on introducing new technology, and you don't want to fail that project. And so therefore, you may want to think about hiring or engaging with an external consultancy such as PeopleForce, for example, whereby we provide project management services. We help with process reengineering, internal rollout, the whole change management. We can do data migration for you, training, testing, supporting the parallel runs, and post-live support. Essentially, we become an extension of your team during an implementation. And that's something that you may want to consider thinking about when looking at the structure and formation of your team. Okay. Further, implementation team internal, you would have a steering group. The internal steering group should be made up of the project sponsor, the project manager, perhaps some key members of the HR and payroll team, and if you've got any external personnel involved as part of the internal team structure, include them within the steering group as well. The objective really of the steering group is to meet periodically to update on the progress of the project, to go through any project risks or concerns, any project budget-related issues or concerns, and any decisions or solutions that need to be discussed is usually done so in this forum. So during an implementation, I would highly recommend that there is an internal steering group set up to tackle these objectives. Okay, so let's do a poll question. I'll hand over to Denis for this.
Right, thanks very much, Pritul. Okay, first poll question up here is, have you identified your internal project team? The options here are, yep, HR will manage alongside the day job. Yes, we have a dedicated team. No idea yet, we're too busy, very possible. Or none of the above. So we'll give a minute or two for that. If you could give your responses ASAP, it'd be very interesting to see the results. All right. Okay. So give a few more seconds. Fingers on buzzers. Okay. Well, 60% say that HR will manage alongside their day job, and 20% say no, we've got no idea, we're still too busy, and none of the above. They're still probably in the discovery stage or something like that. So that kind of bears out more or less what we've been seeing in the past, isn't it, Pritul?
Yeah, I mean, obviously HR have got to be involved during the implementation. I think a lot of organizations, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes do not understand the extent of the workload involved during the implementation until they actually get to it. And so at that point, sometimes organizations fall flat and decide that they need to bring in some support. HR is one of those functions whereby it could become really busy in BAU mode. It only requires some meaty disciplinaries or grievances to come through, or restructuring exercises that then just pulls the HR team into focusing on that. And at the same time, if they've got a project that they are trying to implement as well, it could become very tricky. And so this is why I was talking about having a dedicated project team and ensuring that that the team is adequately resourced. And if that means engaging a contractor or interim or an external consultancy, then so be it. But have that do some planning around that. I think is very important.
Yeah, 100% with you. I think in the past I've seen where HR have tried to manage alongside the day job, and it has extended the process. It hasn't necessarily made it more effective or anything, but it's certainly drawn out the process, and that's not a good thing either. So,
absolutely.
Okay, thanks for that. Back to you, Pritul.
Okay. Right. So the implementation methodology. So it's very important to understand that there is an approach to the implementation. Each provider, so depending on who you've selected, which organization you're going with, they will have their own methodology that they will introduce to you. But broadly speaking, these are the different stages involved in an implementation. So stage one is often called prepare, initiate, readiness, mobilization, planning. Different providers will use different terminology. I've kind of given you some examples here. And essentially this means signing off the statement of work, making sure the scope of the particular project is agreed by all parties, and because that document will define the project. And so if it's not on there, it's not in scope. And so it's very important that this document is created and signed off by all stakeholders at the early stage. Anything that forms outside of that, and you realize later on in the project, this will almost certainly be out of scope and therefore will have a commercial impact. And so that's something to keep in mind. Other things, project team, as was mentioned, you've got to have your internal project team set up and ensure that the split between BAU and project activities is agreed. You're more than likely going to have to do some e-learning and attend some online sessions to get yourself more familiar with your chosen product. You may have, I would say, participated in the product demonstrations during the procurement process. However, technology is always evolving. A lot of organizations are releasing new versions of their technology every 6 months, or sometimes even more frequently. And so by the time you start an implementation, the product could look very different to what you've seen during the demonstration. So it's important to get yourself familiar with your chosen product. And also during the procurement stage, if you were involved in that, you will no doubt have seen various different solutions. So it's very easy to forget the features and functionality that you saw in your chosen solution. So e-learning is another step that takes place usually during this stage one. Of course, you put together the project plan, you define the timeline for the project. Some projects will have different phases within the project, because it's take a typical implementation that is HR, payroll, let's say workforce management, learning, and performance. That, as an example, could look, a project phasing could look like HR and payroll and workforce management as phase one, and learning and performance as phase two, for example. So it's very important to understand what your priorities are and agree with the provider what the phasing of the projects could look like. Okay. Of course, you should do a risk assessment at this stage as well. Again, it's a very big investment for the organization when implementing technology, and it's very important to identify what the potential risks are likely to be. So these are all kind of stage 1 activities. Stage 2 is when you start to, the different terminology from providers is explore, elaborate, model, discovery, blueprinting, or assess. Essentially, this is where your specific business requirements are documented by the provider, so that they can go away and configure or build the system, which is stage 3, to your requirements. So it's very important here that the key people within the organization are involved in this stage 2, because if you haven't said that, if you haven't spoken about a particular requirement and later find that it's not built into the system, well, then you're going to be in trouble later on in the project. So it's very important that the right people are involved in documenting, gathering those requirements at this stage. Some of these stakeholders may say, well, we were involved during the procurement stage. We told you what we wanted then, but that typically is very high level. This is where you go much deeper into the requirements, so that the organization, the provider, knows how to configure your particular solution to make it very specific to your particular organization. You would also, in stage 2, put together a data migration plan. Remember, this is a huge exercise here internally. You may be pulling data off multiple sources, multiple systems, spreadsheets, paper-based, and of course, you're taking on the opportunity to cleanse this data. So it's important that you make a plan and you create a strategy for your data migration and have that signed off by all parties. Data migration for me is a big part of a project that often delays projects because clients massively underestimate the amount of work that's involved in that. So it's very important to make sure the correct resources are deployed to this activity and that the timeline is agreed. Okay. You should also start to look at your testing strategy as well during this stage as well, in terms of how you want to test the configuration and who you want involved, etc. This then leads us to stage 3. Again, different terminology there at the top: realize, solution build, refine, setup, prototype. These are the typical names for this particular stage that we see from different providers. Essentially, this is configuration. This is building your system the way you need it. If there is interfacing in scope, so if you are interfacing your chosen solution with a third-party product, for example, your finance system, or maybe only HR is in scope and you're keeping your current payroll system, there may be some integration or interface requirements here as well. So that's important to agree in terms of a plan for that and timeline as well. Then we go on to stage 4. This is where your built system that the provider has configured for you is often played back to you. And this is where it's either called playback or control room pilot we've seen, or training. This is the names for that particular stage, which is where you have the opportunity to see the configured system. And if there's different aspects of that particular product or playback that you see that doesn't seem quite right for you, or maybe you didn't mean when you're defining your requirements, you meant something else, and the provider interpreted that as something completely different. Here is your opportunity to refine those, or do some reconfiguration and explain to the provider that, no, I didn't quite mean this, I meant that. And so there's a good opportunity to get reconfiguration done. Here as well, during this stage, training takes place. This is where your key project team members are trained on the project. This is just the project team, so HR or payroll team, or certain members of the operations team if workforce management is in scope. This is where they're trained. Data is often loaded as well into a test system at this stage. And this is all planning ahead of the next stage, which is a really fundamental stage, which is all around testing. So back to stage 4, you would also create your test scripts as well. Now, test scripts are often created by or given to you by the provider as standard test scripts. This is where you are testing the product and there are different scenarios. So it could be an example of a test script could be enter a new starter. And then you'd go and perform that particular script inside a test environment to see if it is performing the way you expected it to perform. Now, as I mentioned, the provider will give you some standard test scripts to go through. But guess what? Those standard test scripts that the provider has created will definitely pass, because otherwise the provider will not give you these standard test scripts. So the point I think I'm trying to make is that you have got to create some business specific test scripts that is very important to you as an organization, and ensure that you test those as well. So that's stage 5. If there is integration, if you are interfacing with third-party products, then there is a bit of system integration testing that's involved in stage 5 as well, to make sure that the flow of information between solution A and solution B is flowing in whichever direction you wanted it to flow, and it's flowing successfully. And I think that's important to test as well. Then stage 6, this is where you deploy. So this is often known as deploy, production cutover. You could have some parallel run if payroll is in scope here, and also training and rollout. And what I mean by that is the rollout to the wider population of employees as opposed to just the project team. Here, typically, your data and configuration is transferred from a test environment to a live environment. And then it's during the live environment that you would you would then roll out the system to the wider employees typically. Parallel runs could also take place here. It could be that there's just one parallel run. There could be 2 parallel runs. There could even be a reverse parallel. But it's important, you will have decided how many parallel runs you're having right at the beginning of the project during the statement of work process. And then stage 7 is often known as operate, run, live running, or post-live. And this is essentially handover to support. There's some post-live support or post-live activities. And this is where you are phasing in and using your system as a business as usual happening. So various stages of the implementation methodology here. This is just very broadly summarized here. Each solution provider may differ in its approach, and so it's very important to understand this right from the beginning of the project. Okay, I'd like to encourage you to ask any questions if you have got any in the chat function, so we can cover those off during the Q&A session that we'll have later on. Okay, so some tips on data migration. So the data migration template usually is quite clunky. If anyone thinks that it's just a cut and paste job, it's not. So again, ensure that there is adequate resource assigned to this activity. Again, you're looking at the data from various different sources here, existing systems, paper-based, HR Drive, etc. Take the opportunity to get missing data as well, missing information, and ensure that that's included within the data transfer process. You may also need to decide how far back you want to go. So for example, leavers, how far back do you want to go? Do you want to just cover off leavers that left anytime after beginning of this current year or the beginning of last year? It's important to understand and define how far back you want to go. Obviously, taking into account GDPR and any retention schedules that you've got. You also should decide what you want to do with documents. A lot of organizations often have HR drives, where they store documents such as contracts, passports, HR-related documents, really, that is individual or personal HR-related documents to each employee. Do you want to bring this onto the new system, or continue maintaining that in a HR drive going forward? These are some things to think about. If you want to have them transferred into a new system, you may need to think about the naming convention of these documents, because some providers do have a mass ability to transfer documents into the HR system. But if they do that for you, then the document file name would need to be named in a certain way using a convention, so that during the transfer, each document can be transferred to the relevant employee's file. Okay, back to you, Dennis, for another poll question.
Yes, indeed. Thanks very much, Pritul. Well, this is our second poll question, and it's always a good one. Do you know what state your current data is in? Is it clean within an existing system? Have you got it in various Excel spreadsheets all over the place? Have you got a combination of Excel spreadsheets and paper-based only, or none of the above? So if you get your fingers on the buzzers, and we'll have a look, see what comes out of this. Give us another half a minute or so. If you just like to share your current status with you, we promise we won't tell anybody. Okay. Right, well, we'll close it now. I think what we've got here is a third, say, clean inside an existing system, the third in the various spreadsheets, and again, a combination of spreadsheets and paper. And I think the last two are what we tend to come across mostly, isn't it, Pritul? I think that's
yeah, I mean,
fairly representative, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of organizations will have data in various different Excel sheets and paper-based. And this is why really, if it's the first time they're introducing sophisticated technology, you tend to find that, data is all over the place that's been maintained over a number of years through multiple Excel sheets. And these people are often spending countless number of hours producing lists or reports for senior management because they're having to dig data out from various different sources and channels.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think generally when I've asked a client what their data is like, they say 70% correct, but you never know which 70%, so absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, and on we go, Pritul.
Okay, so workflows. So one of the approach that you can take with your implementation is a vanilla approach. Now, a vanilla approach is where you as an organization is adopting the different processes that is already inbuilt within your chosen solution provider's system. And taking this approach sometimes helps shorten the implementation, because if you're taking the view that, nope, I want the new system to carry out all the processes that we currently do as we currently do it, we want the system to cope with that in exactly that same way. You ask yourself, well, okay, you can do that, but what is the reason? Why don't we take the approach that the system is dictating? And if there's a damn good reason as to why we should not take that approach, then let's talk about that particular process. But otherwise, taking a vanilla approach could be a very good way of introducing a new solution, and it will certainly cut down the amount of time frame involved. Because if you want your process built in the system, then of course you need to go through the process of discovery, so writing down what the requirements are, then building that, then testing that, then retesting that if there are any faults, or reconfiguring that, and then making that live. And so you can very easily cut down some of those stages if you just went with a vanilla approach. It may be fine for certain organizations, it may not be, but it's worth considering whether a vanilla approach is the way that you should go with a particular process, particular solution. Have a look at what your as-is processes are and what the to-be processes should be. And see if when you document the to-be processes, you should take the new system into account. You should take the future workforce and how you want to engage with them into account. You should take the reduction of paper-based processes into account. So there's various ways in which you can change your processes, and it's important that you document those and really engage with the relevant stakeholders internally when you are documenting your 2B processes. It's, again, key stakeholders. Very important to engage with various stakeholders. So don't just define your processes the way you think that each stakeholder would want to see it behaving. Include them, because if you're engaging them in the process, you're more likely to ensure that they are using the system, using the solution going forward. It's always good to have things like alerts, reminders, notifications, automatic emails flying around for certain things, especially when it comes to data-driven activities such as expiry dates, passport expiry dates, visa expiry dates, contract expiry dates. Use the system to help you with these processes, to streamline your processes, and a lot of systems will help you, will have the features that enable these kind of functionality to help you streamline some of your processes. Okay, self-service. So this is when you are rolling out the product or the solution to essentially the wider population of employees across the organizations. You need to think about access, what kind of access you want to give them. Do you want to give them limited access, read-only access to certain things, or change by request, or completely devolved access? I think it's important. This is where you're going to help reduce transactional activity within the HR department if you are devolving a lot of the access to employees through self-service. Again, it's at the bottom of my slide here, but mobile access. Yeah, talked about millennials and how they access technology through mobile phones a lot. Let's build a product that it helps us engage with that workforce going forward. It's always important to do a pilot study before full self-service rollout. So select a group of employees or departments within the organization and go through and show them the system, let them have a play around with it, ask them to try to break it and come up with some different suggestions and ideas before you reconfigure self-service functionality and then roll that out either by teams, departmentally, or by location. Some users will value basic user manuals. I would always suggest that there is some kind of user manual, have some screenshots, and help them navigate themselves through the system. When you're rolling out self-service, you may want to take the trainer approach, or you may want to create short video demonstrations, or you may just simply want to send out a user manual and roll out via electronic communication to employees, give them their login details and ask them to play away with the new solution. Some organizations may decide to adopt that process, especially if their employees are quite tech savvy. They'll just get on with it because the number of systems that have been introduced to these employees may be quite vast, and they may be very used to being introduced to new technology. If that's the approach you're using, HR departments may want to run some surgeries for those users that perhaps are not so tech savvy and they want to go through with someone physically on how to use the system. So these are some ideas that you may want to adopt. Dedicated training sessions for finance and senior management, I think, would be wise, because you want to ensure that these stakeholders are using the product and are taking advantage of some of the benefits of it. And so you may want to have some dedicated sessions for them. Testing, as I mentioned before, the provider will give you some standard test scripts, but they are designed to pass. So it's definitely a useful exercise. But in addition to that, I would always recommend that you have some business specific test scripts and scenarios. Include key users within this process, those that are actually going to undertake some of these activities within the HR team, payroll team, workforce management, or ops team, etc., and ensure that they are happy with the way things are running, because it's during this testing stage, it's a perfect opportunity to get them involved during that. Test your workflows, test any integrations with third-party solutions, and if there's any issues that are encountered, solve them in the testing stage and carry out retesting, because you don't want to identify issues with certain features later on down the line, because that will just create all sorts of issues later, and potential commercial impact as well. Okay, payroll. So right at the beginning of the project, you will have agreed how many parallel runs you want to carry out. If, for example, you're coming towards the start of a new tax year, you may want to consider having parallel runs just before that, so that the new system is starting off with a new tax year. It's always cleaner, and it means that some of the year-to-date cumulatives do not need to be taken into account as well. If you've opted for a bureau service, or whether it's in-house, the approach may be different. So it's important to strategize your payroll rollout accordingly. Test the reports, so especially if you're producing reports to send to third-party providers such as pensions or HMRC or whoever it may be. I think it's important that there is a testing involved of those reports. Make sure your payslips are available online through self-service. A lot of organizations are moving away from physical payslips nowadays, so it's important to make these available. This reduces the number of times people ask for, the last 3 months of payslips or whatever it is they need as part of mortgage applications, and just give them access to it via self-service. I think it's important. Implementing your core HR module first is important if you are going with payroll, because a lot of the information will feed in to payroll from HR, and a lot of the input will be done by HR as well. So if there's changes of hours or salary or whatever it may be, or departments, that input will be done typically via HR, and payroll is then involved in processing that data for the purposes of pay. Recruitment. So if you are using the recruitment module and you want to introduce applicant tracking, then it's important to understand some killer questions that you could ask during the application stage. This helps to shortlist applicants, especially if the volume of applicants are typically quite high. Rather than sifting through hundreds and hundreds of applications, you can use killer questions to help with shortlisting. A lot of recruitment solutions do have personalized messages or automated messages, I would say, that goes to applicants from the system. I think it's very important that you take into account sensitivity around this. I mean, you hardly want to send an automated communication to the applicant 30 seconds after they've applied by saying with a message that says something along the lines of, "Thank you very much, we have carefully reviewed your application, and unfortunately on this occasion you are not successful." That's not wise to send that within 30 seconds of an application, for example. So think about these things, think about the applicant journey, and remember, it's your business's brand here that's very important, because your reputation, your image, your branding, your culture, company culture will come across to the applicants during this stage. Okay. Right, reporting. So again, if I was to ask people why they've chosen a new solution or why they think the new solution is important, a lot of organizations say, well, our reporting is for reporting because we are spending forever putting together information that's taken from various different sources, and reporting is just not accurate. So it's important that you take that into account when you're implementing a new system. It's important, historically, you may have had lots of different reports. And some may be required for statutory reporting requirements such as gender pay gaps, etc. But others are just internal management reports. And you may have been producing reports for years and years and not really knowing who reads them and why they're needed. Implementing a new system is a good opportunity to completely look at the number of reports you are needed. And I think it's very important, so bullet point number 3 here, to ask yourselves, what decisions are management trying to make from reports? And so once you've understood that, you can almost reverse it and build reports to help management make those decisions. If there are reports that you've been producing for years, which management aren't even looking at, and it's certainly not helping them to make decisions, then ask yourselves if these reports are even needed going forward. So it's just some tips really on reporting there. There could be some very complex reports that you need to build, which is fine. I would always suggest using an expert reports consultant to help you build some of these reports. Remember, this is a one-time exercise really to build these complex reports, and then you can just run them at regular intervals through the system. So it's good to get an expert reports consultant, I would say, involved in helping you do this. A lot of providers will provide consultants that are reports experts anyway, so utilize their skills and expertise as well. Dashboard reporting is another thing that's quite important. You get snippets of information as soon as you log into the system, and it gives you information at your fingertips that you need, such as who's off sick, or how many people are off sick today, or various information that you can produce on a dashboard. And this can be different for each user type, so whatever is important for that particular user. Okay, project planning. So you've got to have the right people. We've talked about that already. We've got to have potential phased rollout by potentially module or location, or just looking at what your priorities are, and defining your project plan accordingly. Allow plenty of time for data migration, as I've mentioned. Don't forget that you also need some breathing space to do your day job as well, and that's very important. Another point here is that the internal project plan could look very different to a provider's project plan. The provider's project plan will more than likely include activities that the provider is undertaking. So any training or configuration that they are doing for you, or data transfer support that they're providing, etc. The internal project plan will have various other things, such as the actual data migration activities, or the actual preparation of test scripts, the actual testing, the internal rollout, the whole change management piece there. So it's important to understand that if a provider is giving you a project plan, you've then got to take that and create an internal project plan, ensuring that the timelines agreed with the provider is also adhered to, but the activities will vary. Okay. Project risks, always very important to document your potential project risks. There's a project team annual leave. Are key people away on annual leave during key project milestones, for example? Project team members off sick, or anyone that leaves, or any potential flight risks. All of these types of things you need to be taken into account. Here's another one. Give notice to your old providers. This is one that sometimes people overlook. You look into the contract of your existing provider if this is a replacement project, because sometimes the small print will require you to give X months of notice, but that notice can only start at a particular time in the year, etc. So you could find yourself having to pay contractually for another whole year when you don't even need it for that long. So it's always very important to give notice at the right time and ensure that you look into the contract. Okay, managing change is very important. So there's going to be a lot of people feeling insecure, nervous, and so all your internal communications is going to be very important, and you need to make sure that you manage this change well, taking into account all the sensitivities. And of course, integration. So if there is third-party integration required with third-party products, it's important that that piece is factored into your project planning as well. Okay, how are we measuring success? So the very broad way of measuring success is that information is accurate, the turnaround time for information requests from senior management has reduced, HR department are more involved in kind of value add activities rather than transactional, so less transactional. There's processes that are automated and nothing really falls through the cracks because you aren't having to manually remember to do certain things. Was the project on time and in budget? Again, is a good measure. And something as simple as, are employees paid on time and correctly? These are certain ways of measuring success. My next slide gives you a real example, recent example. We've been supporting, or just about to start supporting a client on an implementation, and we asked them the question, how will you measure the success of this? And we asked them to answer this question from different stakeholders' points of view. So senior management, what do they want to see? How will they measure success of this project? And this particular client said, well, if the annual leave and annual pay and bonus review process is seamlessly handled online using the system, then we would consider this to be a success. So positive feedback from senior management on their people costs and obviously the return on investment calculations. Just showing senior management that something like absence figures have seriously dropped due to the introduction of sophisticated technology will help. Line managers, automation of some processes, quality of reports could be a good judge of measuring success, ability to manage their teams directly in the system, improved people management responsibilities, and reduced absenteeism. So that's from a line manager's point of view. Employees' point of view, self-service access. We talked about mobile app, access to their pay slips, ability to do shift swaps if that's important for your organization, ability to view your rota, doing expense claims, and just visibility of information and a good way of engaging with the organization. And so other departments, HR, recruitment, helping with the applicant journey. I think we've talked about that before, reduced transactional data entry, efficient processes. All of these types of things would be important from an HR recruitment perspective. Payroll, accuracy of information, paying people on time, having accurate payroll reports, and having accurate information from HR are all actions that will measure the success from a payroll point of view. And then, of course, you've got your project team adhering to the project plan and the deadlines and whether it's all within budget, and you've got happy stakeholders. So all of these are kind of ways that you can measure success of a project. Okay. Conscious of time, so we're going to move into question and answers.
Yep.
Denis?
Yes, indeed. We've got questions that have come in before and some have been asked now, but those we can't cover off, we'll reply individually to the people, I'm sure. So the first one is, what's the best way to balance project work with business as usual?
Well, I think it's important to understand what is the expectation from the provider of the project team. So what are all the different activities, all the different phases involved in a project, and then doing an exercise whereby you decide who is going to be involved in the project and how much time they can devote to the project. Let's put it down into percentages, for example. So, Joe Bloggs HRBP can be involved 20% of their time in the project. The rest of the time, they have to go into BAU mode. Others may be more involved in the project. And so you may want to decide to pull in some of these resources into the project and backfill them with temporary resources, or alternatively, use a consultancy to help become an extension of the internal project team during an implementation.
Okay, that's fine. What if our chosen provider is providing implementation services? How much does the in-house team have to be involved?
Well, you see, there's this misconception, really. The provider's implementation services are limited to provider-side activities, such as, configuration, training, data transfer support, and basically making sure that the software is working how it should be working. Whereas the internal activities are completely different, as I've mentioned before. So it's important not to take that view that, oh, the provider is helping us with implementation, so we'll be fine. I think it's important to ensure that and remember that there is a lot of internal activities required.
Great. Well, there are other questions, but we've run out of time, I'm afraid. So
Okay.
we will respond individually to the people. What it remains for me to say, thanks very much indeed, Pritul, for a really brilliant insight into the implementation process. It certainly gives everybody a lot to think about. And thanks to the people who asked the questions as well. Our contact details will be displayed on a slide. So do free to get in touch with us if you need any help or any support. In the meantime, we're very, very delighted to say that we'll be doing further sessions. There'll be a mix of discussions, debates, panel Q&A, and talking to guests from various vendors who can tell us about the benefits of their products and some insight into the way forward with systems generally. So that's all from us for today. I'd like to thank you all for watching and wish you a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.